Welcome back to the FTN Fantasy Team Preview Series. I'm your host, Mike Randle. Follow me on X at Randle Rain. And today we have a true star, a true guest, Mike Renner from CBS Sports, NFL and draft analyst. He does the Pushing the Pile pod as well with Kyle Long. It's incredible to have him on for a few minutes to give us some insight as we get ready for the 2024 NFL season. Preseason's over, NFL is here, and we got Mike on board. Mike, I'm going to kick it off right away. What were your takeaways? Just some of your key takeaways that you saw in the preseason that we should be aware of as we're getting ready to kick it off next week.
I think my two biggest ones were, usually with my job is doing draft focus. I'm focusing on rookies mainly and just like NFL readiness. I think the two biggest ones were this quarterback class. I don't say lived up to the hype, but looks ready to play. I don't think I'm worried about making these guys day one starters, a lot of them, and then developing bad habits and that sort of thing. Not to say all 6 of those first rounders are going to work out, but at least I don't think there's any team really regretting their decision right now, from what I saw on tape this preseason. And the other one is this offensive line class. Truly, I think that position specifically, not to you can't crown anyone after the preseason when you're playing against backups, third stringers, that sort of thing. But you could definitely tell the guys who aren't going to be ready. And a vast majority of those first rounders and a lot of those day 2 interior offensive linemen look like they can start right away. And that's just a rarity. So those two positions, I think, were the biggest ones. And then my third takeaway, I think, was watching what the Rams did, not playing a single guy who's any sort of going to see any sort of time on this roster. I think we might see more of that, unfortunately, for NFL fans, because obviously you want to see these guys. But with 17 games, 18-week NFL season, keeping your players fresh all year long is going to be huge. So I think more teams might be following that Rams model going forward.
Mike, imitation's the highest form of flattery, and we saw that. They jumped on the Falcons because Michael Penix didn't play that much. And last year in the fantasy community, of course, Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, those sort of players popped, and we didn't get to see them in the preseason. So it's such a critical point. And I love what you say about the offensive line, because Jim Harbaugh gave us a preview. He said offensive linemen are weapons. We consider them offensive weapons. And you saw teams needing to fortify that in the first round, correct?
Oh, 100%. I do think, and especially in this past year's class, was just a year that you just wanted to take one. I didn't care if you needed one, you wanted to take one. So hats off to all those teams that not only took one, but two, like the Cowboys, like the Rams. I think you're not Rams, like the Steelers, similar colors, that I think they're very happy with their decision to go and really invest in those positions going forward.
AFC North, one of the most competitive divisions, if not the top one in football. There's a lot of storylines here. You have the Ravens, of course, looking to get to the Super Bowl. You have the Bengals looking to go from worst to first with an easier schedule. You have the Steelers here with the quarterback questions. But I want to go to the Browns. Deshaun Watson, Nick Chubb, sort of two under-the-radar storylines here. Watson had some soreness recently, but this Browns team, a dominant defense last year, but needs that quarterback play. And Nick Chubb, when do you think he's coming back? So talk about Watson. Can he regain the magic that he had a few years ago? And Chubb, do you think he's going to be back soon enough to make an impact here for Cleveland? Because really, they are a pivot point in that AFC North. They could win the division, or if things don't go right, they could finish last. What do you say about the Browns?
I think this team is utterly loaded. I think if they are even Deshaun Watson's worst that he was in a Texans uniform away from winning the North, truly, like that's how good this roster is, top to bottom, position by position. It's just, he's never been like that since he got traded. He has not been even close. And the shoulder soreness lasting this far into this year really makes you worried if you're a Browns fan. And so to me, it's more, do they have the courage to just play Jameis Winston? Because what we saw last year from Deshaun wasn't even as good as what we've seen from Jameis Winston over the course of his career. And we saw with Flacco that it didn't take much. It took backup quarterback level play to make this team into a sort of juggernaut down the stretch there. So yeah, I don't think if the shoulder still is what it is in terms of having to take days off in the preseason, I just don't think it's going to happen with him. I just truly don't this year for the Cleveland Browns, unfortunately. Chubb is the Chubb one's interesting though, because what his injury was when it happened, I was like, okay, that's like a career ender, especially for a running back. We've seen it before. The Marcus Lattimore at South Carolina was a highly touted prospect, has that injury, never ends up seeing a football field once he gets drafted by the 49ers. Just can't do it.
Mhm.
But if there's anyone that can, it's Nick Chubb, right? But I just, the history of that catastrophic an injury, especially this late on in his career, I don't foresee him coming back to the Nick Chubb we know and love. And I just, unfortunately, it's sad to say, but it would really blow my mind to see him being productive on a football field again.
Mike, we've seen a pattern here of teams that have finished last in their division, then the following year winning the division because teams coming in and out of the playoffs. The teams that finished last in 2023, the Patriots, Bengals, Titans, Chargers, the Commanders, Bears, Panthers, and Cardinals. So I wonder, who would you think out of that group, one or two teams, however you want to go with it, if someone did continue that streak this year? And a couple of years ago, we saw two. Who do you think are the team or two that we should target and look for here? Because right now it blows our mind. It's impossible to think of the Panthers, how bad as they were, that they could win the division. But it could happen, and it should happen if the streak continues. What do you say about those teams?
The obvious pick is the Bengals, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're above 500 last year, and that's with Joe Burrow playing just over 9 games. So that's the chalk pick. Of course, they've won the division the previous 2 years. So yeah, that one's easy to say. But the one I'll go off the radar, and this is a call, and I don't know if they're necessarily going to win the division, but I'm picking them to make the playoffs this year. It's the Chargers. I think we're underrating the Jim Harbaugh effect. I know it's in the Chiefs division, but they have the 31st hardest schedule in the NFL this year. Their draw, having finished last place in the West, is very easy. Obviously, outside of those couple games, they're going to have to face the Chiefs. So it's not a difficult schedule. I think Jim Harbaugh, you saw him go from below 500, 6 wins in San Francisco to 36 wins in his first 3 seasons there, 3 straight NFC championship games. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but he has a better quarterback than he's ever had at the NFL level, right? He has a elite NFL quarterback. He's known for those quick turnarounds. He's known for changing the culture in a building quickly. And everyone said the talent was there last year. Everyone was picking this team to do big things just last year. And I know they lost a lot of older players on this roster, but I still foresee them having a pretty quick turnaround with that easy schedule with a fairly easy division outside of the Chiefs. So will it be first? I don't know, but I do think the Chargers are one of the teams that we're talking about in that vein.
Excellent call. And Frank Gore with San Francisco when Jim Harbaugh was there, 1,200, 1,100, and 1,100 rushing yards. You know, Mike, they're going to run the ball, solid offensive line, and the defense is going to be good as well. Next team I'll turn to, the Jaguars. Mike DiRocco, ESPN, came on the show and wanted to promote the fact, and I checked it, he was right, prior to the Trevor Lawrence injury last year. Remember the whole thing where they didn't have the card or he declined the card, whatever it was. The Jaguars were 13-4 in their 17 prior games before that. They were a hot pick coming into last year because of the massive comeback against the aforementioned Chargers. So thoughts on this Jaguars team here in this division? Trevor Lawrence got the big contract, solid wide receiver core. Evan Ingram had 2 touchdowns in the preseason. Defense, what are your thoughts here on the Jaguars entering 2024?
Yeah, I still don't think they did enough in that division, right? You are having to face this Texans now, what looks like it could be a juggernaut for the next 2 or 3 years while CJ Stroud's still cheap, right? I don't think they quite did enough, but they definitely did enough to get back in the playoff picture, in my opinion. I think this team, like you mentioned, Trevor Lawrence, when he was at full strength early on last season, looked like an elite player. He looked like he was close to joining that tier that we kind of just talked about with Justin Herbert, right? I think he is in that caliber when fully healthy and truly looked like it this preseason. He was on point in that, obviously, one game we really got to saw of him, but it was as good as we saw from him over the course of his career. So I want to buy in. I've been one of Trevor's biggest fans, but I do just think this roster, you just go position by position with that division, even wide receivers, O-line, they're behind the Colts and the Texans in both regards. So the situation he's in is just not quite as good as what it is. So if you're buying the Chargers, you just have to be buying Trevor Lawrence because that's the one thing to really hang their hat on compared to the Colts and the Texans in that division.
In your experience, wide receivers, players in general, wide receivers that hold out during training camp or are stuck in contract negotiations, and we just saw that CeeDee Lamb is back now after hitting that mega deal yesterday. Do you worry about their production during the season? Do you worry about soft tissue injuries? Jamar Chase is back now, but he's still not fully there. The Brandon Ayuk saga is like, all my children's soap opera. It will never end. Do you have a concern in your experience with wide receivers when they hold out, or do you think this is much ado about nothing? They'll come back, they'll get ready and fit right into the offense.
It's not about fitting into the offense necessarily. It's more about the injury risk. Okay. When you really aren't getting that ramp up period, when you come to the facility and the first week you're 100%, and now maybe they'll, like a guy like CeeDee Lamb or a guy like Jamar Chase, they'll ease him in early weeks in the season, which also is obviously something to worry about if you're a fantasy player, that he's not going to be getting full reps. But like, you can't go from 0 to 100 and not expect those hamstrings, those quads to respond like they would if you had that. So that's the biggest worry to me, is just those guys who are so tweaked up, they're so tuned up, such high-end athletes having to go now to 100% after not having that training camp to really, feel their body out. That's the worrisome thing to me.
Last question, Mike, then we'll get you out of here. So generous with your time. Russell Wilson versus Justin Fields. It's a very polarizing question. I believe, just my opinion, that Mike Tomlin thinks he has a very good team. And last year, they were 9-7 with all the struggles of Kenny Pickett. So he brings in Russell Wilson. Don't turn it over, Russ. Manage the game. Do some deep balls to George Pickens, because that's something he still excels at. Did a nice job with Cortland Sutton. He is his choice. The question is, do you see Justin Fields taking over? There's questions about him holding the ball, the turnovers. Of course, Ryan Poles couldn't get a lot for him when he was on the market. Do you see at some point Justin Fields taking over the Steelers offense, or do you think it's just going to be sort of the Justin Fields package and Russell Wilson is going to guide them? Of course, assuming no injury. What are your thoughts on this Pittsburgh quarterback situation?
I think it's going to be Russ. I just think if you're looking at Arthur Smith's offense and what he's done over his career, I think Russ is just a little better fit. The deep ball and the accuracy at that level of the field has just been Wilson's calling card. The one thing he still has to his game, it is that. So I do think Mike Tomlin, like you said, Mike Tomlin thinks they have a good team. I don't necessarily agree that they're like a Super Bowl contender, but they're not going to just take a year to see if Fields can figure it out, right? They didn't invest enough in him to do that like the Bears did when they drafted him in the first round, to give him those kind of runway. They wanted a guy who's going to give them the best chance right now. I think that's Russ, because Fields is so much more boom or bust. On a game-to-game basis, he can take over with his legs. He can do big things in that regard, but then he can really go into a shell if you can contain him in the pocket and force him to play there. So Russ just gives you a little bit more of a steady baseline. And with that Steelers defense right now and how it's constructed, looking like one of the better defenses in the NFL, I think they're comfortable with that steady baseline that Wilson has.
If you are not following Mike Renner, what are you doing? On X, at Mike Renner _ CBS Sports NFL draft analyst, one of the best in the business, pushing the pile pod. Make sure you like, subscribe as well. Mike, thank you so much for a few minutes. This was great insight to some of the key issues that we're facing here at FTN for the NFL season, fantasy, of course. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Can't wait for it to get started next week.
For sure, Mike. Happy to do it, man. Can't wait as well.
The NFL Team Preview Series is sponsored by Boom Fantasy, your top choice for daily fantasy sports action. Boom Fantasy has the most innovative games that cater to both casual and hardcore fans. Win up to 500 times your entry only at Boom Fantasy. Download now on the App Store and Google Play. Use promo code FTN to get a no-sweat bonus up to $100.